Yo, what's going on, everybody? We back with yet another episode, much anticipated episode of Withtimewecan. I'm your host, LeBrian. Had the pleasure of introducing you guys to Joshua Garner. Joshua was a man convicted of a crime that he will eventually talk to you about. So without further ado, I want to introduce Joshua. How you doing, my brother?
I'm doing pretty good, brother.
Yo, man, thanks for doing this with me, man.
Absolutely.
Yo, before we get started, just want to let the people know where you're from, man. Let us know a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'm actually from Northeast Philadelphia in the Holmesburg section. I grew up with both my parents in my life and an older brother. I went to J.H. Brown Elementary School, but then switched over to Catholic school, higher curriculum, and definitely better classes. And then eventually I graduated from high school, and that was pretty much my childhood. I did have a really good childhood. It wasn't until later on in my life where the trouble began.
Man, we're gonna get right into it, man. So what types of trouble, what type of thing were you into that led into your incarceration?
Well, in particular, I was dealing with a mental health disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, from an event that happened in 2011 where I lost my best friend and he drowned in the Delaware River. My daughter's mom fell into the river, and him and me jumped in to try to save her. Two other guys jumped in as well. They ran down the shoreline, jumped in. They double teamed, brought her back. I reached him, and he was in a state of panic. And we ended up getting pulled apart from the current and the undertow, and he ended up drowning. I don't ever remember making it back to shore. The psychologists say that it's that my mind was trying to protect itself by erasing different memories to try to prevent from the state of shock that I was in. After that, I blamed myself. I felt as if I wasn't strong enough, and told myself I wasn't strong enough or brave enough, and that it was my fault that he died. And that led to my issues with post-traumatic stress disorder and the night terrors. And my way of trying to fix that was self-medicating with drugs, and that's where my addiction began. My addiction led into obviously into the criminal world. Yeah.
Wow. How old were you at the time?
I was 19 at the time, and my best friend was only 17. I never experienced any type of grief like that in my life. The only grief I've ever dealt with was like losing a dog. And even though that's a close companion to us, it's nothing like losing another human being. Especially your best friend, right? Wow.
So I wanted to ask you, man, through your troubles with addiction, so what happened with that? So did that lead into your incarceration? Was it drug related?
Oh, yes. Well, my parents were always supportive, and they were trying to help get me help with through different psychiatric facilities and stuff like that. However, with the insurance, they would only cover for a certain amount of days. You know what I mean? And then they release you back into the community without a treatment plan or anything. So it's they'll hand you here's a bunch of prescriptions. Stay up with your doctor. Don't come off your meds. If you do, then there's nothing we can do for you. So when I was left like that, my parents still tried to support me, but eventually I isolated from them, and particularly my substance abuse led into me becoming violent in the streets. There's only one way of getting money that I've seen. There's plenty of ways of getting it, but the main way I seen it was in acts of violence, or even sometimes dealing drugs. But behind dealing drugs, you have to be able to back that up with violence. And ultimately, that led to my incarceration. The victim in my case was actually someone that I would get high with, would deal drugs with, and it was a dispute over money, which then ultimately led to a fight. And that fight, I took it out of hand immediately, and I stabbed him multiple times between his neck and his face, and then was shortly later arrested.
Wow, man. Listen, I've been doing this a long time, man, and now I know you took accountability that what you did was wrong, but I really feel like there were a lot of contributing factors, and I feel like especially in Philadelphia County, we definitely have to do a lot better with protecting those that go through severe trauma like that, because had you not went through that experience and got the help that you needed without the insurance discrepancies, you probably wouldn't be sitting here today,
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Right. So let's talk about just your first trip going up to state prison. What was your mentality like, just being in the county first, going to court and going up to your home jail?
Yeah, well, since my bail was $1 million and my case was high profile, I was initially charged with attempted murder. I was placed in maximum security facility on State Road, which was PIC, Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center. And in there, it was hard because a lot of the other guys that were in there were for high profile cases. So obviously, I had to earn my respect, you know what I mean? And in that comes with violence, and that comes with, with fighting and all the sorts of getting in trouble. However, I was able to maintain for the most part with the belief that I may be going home and not going upstate. But the reality kicked in when the district attorney's office, the DA's office, offered me my first plea of 20 to 40 years for the attempted murder. Then I realized that this wasn't a game. I wasn't going to do county time, that I was going upstate. Eventually I pled guilty, sentenced to a maximum of 25 years. And on my journey upstate, we go through a process of going through SEI Graterford, which is now was switched over to SEI Phoenix. But at the time it was SEI Graterford, which there we were quarantined in a, not quarantined as of COVID, but quarantined as we were isolated from the rest of the general population because we were a new intake. So from there you get sent to SEI Camp Hill, which that's a whole nother journey. In the beginning of your incarceration, as soon as you get there, in the beginning of your intake, you are placed on our unit, which is total lockdown, no movement, 24 hours a day, and then they have what's called 72-hour shower. So you get 5 minutes soap on, soap off every 72 hours. There's where they evaluate you and see if you are a risk to yourself or others. So you have to remain there for it's a different duration of time, maybe a week, maybe a month. But then you eventually make it to your home jail. My home jail originally was SEI Housdale. Okay. Yeah, which is out in Clearfield County. I feel as if that Philadelphia sends you. Since I was sentenced in Philadelphia, they sentenced me to a section that was as far as possible, away from where I lived. So they sent me on the other side of the state. They do that because they want you to earn your ability to transfer back to your region, to near your home, to near your family. They do that. You have to remain misconduct free for 2 years, and then it takes about another year process to actually get the transfer to go through. If you get any misconducts, then you're no longer eligible for a promotional transfer. So you have to remain, in my case, I was 6 hours away from my family. That's my children, my parents. If they ever want to travel to see me, they would have to get a hotel, and that's driving 6 hours, then getting a hotel. So it's like you won't see them till, they won't come see me till the next day. Because it's like they're already tired from all that driving, and my parents are in their 60s, so they're quite a bit older, so it was difficult for them. So I got to visit maybe every 3 months, for consecutive 2 days, but then I won't see them again for another 3 months. So visiting was definitely difficult from being out there. So it kind of gives you they claim it gives you the incentive to do good so that you can get near home. But in all essence, it's another way of control. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I wanted to touch on a point real quick before we move on. You said that your family would have to drive 6 hours to come see you for 2 days, and then they can't come back for another 3 months. You did talk a little bit about your children in the beginning. Like, how was it being locked up away from your family, given that your mom and your dad, still in the love of marriage, and then your brother is very prolific, and then your kids, they love you and adore you. How was that, just being a father, brother, and son that far away? Yeah, it was definitely very impactful on my children negatively. My daughter was only a little over a year old when I first got incarcerated, so I was raising her on my own because my daughter's mom was still involved in the streets. So it was just me and my daughter before my incarceration. Once I got incarcerated, my parents then had to raise my daughter. So my mom became, my daughter's mother.
Right.
You know what I mean? My dad became my daughter's dad. You know what I mean? The father figure that she needed in her life.
Right.
So they set her a plate and they did everything for her, as well as my son, who's was 5 years older than my daughter. So he was about 6 when I became incarcerated. He took it hard because we were so close, and we spent every other weekend together, and no matter what trouble I was getting myself into, I always made time to go back and see my son. So his biggest thing was he knew where I was at, and I had to explain to him, like, not all bad people are in jail. Right. I had to explain to him what jail was and stuff like that. And to explain that to a 6-year-old, it's very difficult. Right. But we felt it necessary because eventually they would have to come up to see me. You know what I mean? And they would see me in my prison jumper and, see that, this is a building surrounded by barbed wire, and children are very intelligent, especially mine. And they know that, like, this ain't no school, you know what I mean? Like, this is a prison, so it was impactful on them negatively. And my son in particular, he started to act out. A lot of his, when my parents or his mother asked him why was he acting out, he said, I miss my dad. That kills me being in there, and it's like, those times I want to hug him and say, like, it's all right, I'll be home soon, but soon wasn't soon enough,
Right. Right. Speak to me about Housedale. How long did you stay there? How was the experience with Housedale? Because you did a total of 7 years, but I remember you saying that your time was broken up. After the 3-year, I guess, probationary period, they allowed you to transfer to a lesser jail, well, more less secure jail, and then eventually you got down to Chester. But talk to me about Housedale.
Housedale it's the most influential prison on me, not because of the staff or because of programs or anything like that. It's because the inmates themselves. Okay. We have a large lifers population inside Housedale, and because I was serving over 10 years as my minimum and over 25 years as my maximum, then I was eligible for the long-term offenders program. It's a long-term offenders and lifers program, and that's where I got to be introduced to a lot of lifers. But one person in particular, Ilyas Abdul Hadi, like, he took me under his wing. He knew I was new, I was nervous being around people, and he was just like, look, he sat me down and explained to me, like, there's ways of getting out of here without getting out of here. He says the biggest thing you don't want to do is get dug in. Everyone's like, oh, I'm gonna get dug in. He's like, no, find a way to dig out. So he introduced me, he pushed me towards education, working on my case, because he was big in the law library fighting his own case, having been sentenced to life without parole. And he really got me on the right path that I needed to go in, on my journey. He's not the only one. There were so many other guys in there that guided me on my way, in the right direction. And the only problems that I had in that facility was the officers. It's Clearfield County, has a small population of Black and Hispanics. So the staff were limited on, their disparity on race. So they had, majority were white males. We had only a few white women, I believe like 3 or 4 officers, and then 2 Black officers out of all the staff. That's that's first, second, and third shift. So racism was real. Racism was real. And that's where I first, encountered that type of racism, where it was rooted in them naturally, where it wasn't just because they had an incident with another race. No, but this was taught to them, right. And they treated it as such. That was most impactful. But there were those very few, but there were some officers that were motivators, that were there to try to help. But they are very few in between.
Right. Okay. Now, so for those who don't know, Joshua actually became a paralegal and got himself out. He didn't end up having to do the whole 10 to 25 years. Was that transition from the traumatic Joshua? Did that transition into, you know, professional paralegal, you know, education, Joshua? Did that transition happen in Hillsdale?
Yes, that definitely began in Hillsdale. Being introduced to the law library, which is we have limited access to. However, being introduced to the law, I started finding it very easy to do research, and I actually liked it. You know, it became a passion, and so I was really intent on trying to find errors in my case to give back time, and so I started studying. And I was introduced to Blackstone Career Institute, which is actually an outside program. It's nothing that the Department of Correction runs. It's something that you actually have to pay for on the outside.
Wow.
But you do need authorization from the Department of Correction security team in order to do that. However, they don't offer programs like that at facilities like Hillsdale.
Do you ever have plans of becoming like an actual lawyer out here?
Yeah, that's actually my plan. I'm in Bryant and Stratton College right now. It's an online course for paralegal studies, but then I intend on transferring to a four-year college, most likely out here for pre-law, and then to law school. So that's my long-term goal. I do want to be an appellant defense attorney, but that may change over time. However, the only barrier that I have, an obstacle that I'm going to run into, is the bar examination itself, because even if I scored the highest in college, you know, and I was the dean, made the dean's list, and all that, and I passed the bar examination with flying colors, because I am a convicted felon, I have to get over the character fitness examination. It's where then I'm separately evaluated by a committee to determine if I'm in fit mind, you know, if I'm involved in the community. There's so many aspects to it, and I actually have to prove myself. Any other person directly out of law school doesn't have to go through that process. Me being a convicted felon, I would have to.
Wow, so they have to deem you fit for the position, despite having good grades and doing everything. Like they still hold that much power over if you become a lawyer or not.
Yes. When I took a course, a criminal justice course with LaSalle University while I was incarcerated. And in that class we talked about invisible punishment. And these are the invisible punishments that come along with your conviction. When you come, you know, when you don't just do your time and come home. There's so many different things that that society doesn't see that we go through as a form of punishment. Things that are taken from us that any other person, you know, has the right to. We don't. Well, after receiving my certification, paralegal certification, I became a GED tutor.
Nice.
Yeah, I would tutor the guys. I had my own sessions on the unit. They'd come out to other cells, and we'd have a little round table. We go over different subjects, mostly adult basic education subjects, mathematics, science, social studies, English. And with that, I started discovering that a lot of people had other issues outside of, you know, GED or education, even some that were illiterate that need help with reading, but there was deeper issues. A lot of people had issues with their case, and they seen that, you know, they knew I got my paralegal certification, so they're like, oh, well, you really know the law, so, you know, can you help me with my case? So I was like, you know, let me take a look at it. Let's see if I can find anything, you know, and I'm gonna keep it real with them. If I don't find anything, there might be something there, you know, but we'll just keep combing over it until we find something, you know. But I always had to stay honest with them. Money really wasn't a thing to me, so I didn't charge people. You know what I mean? It wasn't important to me at the time. I was okay where I was at, you know what I mean, even with the small amount of money they pay us. But so I started helping them with their cases. Guys, in 2017, they came out with a ruling, Birchfield versus North Dakota, which is on DUIs. It's a blood alcohol test with DUIs, where if a police officer pulls you over and believes that you're intoxicated and takes you to the hospital to do a blood test, if you refuse that blood test, back then the officers used to criminally charge you for refusing that drug test. You're pretty much charged with DUI anyway. However, in Birchfield versus North Dakota, they found that to be unconstitutional. So now that only thing you can do now is suspend your license. You can only get summary offenses, not actual criminal offenses, for refusing a blood alcohol content test. When that ruling came out, it became retroactive, meaning that it was for anyone and everyone that's been convicted in the past, that are going through it right now. When that came out, that I jumped right on it. I was like, okay, well now, there's tons of DUI cases in here. You know what I mean? So like, let me see if some guys' cases are relatable to that. And I found a lot of guys' cases. In the end of 2017, I overturned 17 cases of DUIs in SCI Allendale. And that's where I became known.
Jeez, 17 DUI cases?
Yeah.
Wow.
So most of these guys went home because the DUI was the only thing holding them, or they had the violation that was holding them because of the DUI. Once that was overturned, they were then released. Some of them had other charges that were relatable to it that kept them in there. However, they were resentenced because that charge was now dropped. So that is when I got my name out there. They labeled me as a jailhouse lawyer, you know what I mean, or a legal beagle. But I was okay with that, you know what I mean, because it was,
And you did all that pro bono, so that means it must have really been like something in your heart, man, that told you like, this is my calling and this is my second chance. What about your specific case? Your case specifically, excuse me. Just talk me through the process of even getting that overturned.
Okay, so with that, I knew there must have been some type of error with my sentence. Looking at my sentence at the time, I was like, I've never been convicted of a crime prior. Even though I do have a few arrests, I was never convicted of a crime. So I said, so why did I receive so much time compared to other guys who have aggravated assault cases? So I knew something must have been wrong. Eventually I found out that when I was originally sentenced, I took a non-negotiated open plea, so that I threw myself at the mercy of the courts. They could sentence me whatever number they feel is appropriate, as long as it falls within the statute of the laws of Pennsylvania. That's where I found the error. There's a offense gravity score is what a judge uses to put the level of where your sentencing ranges are on a charge. In my case, they sentenced me, I pled guilty to robbery with the threat of immediate bodily injury. The judge mistakenly sentenced me to robbery inflicting serious bodily injury. It has a different crimes code, it has a different offense gravity score, so I was initially sentenced to the wrong charge. With that being said, I also had issues with merger, where my sentences were ranked consecutive. However, in Pennsylvania, there's certain statutes that state that certain charges must run concurrent with each other. As long as the elements of the crime are the same, those charges are supposed to merge and rank concurrently, runs as one sentence, not two separate sentences.
Right.
So ultimately, I was denied an appeal multiple times. I went to the Superior Court with it. They said I waived that issue for failing to raise it at sentencing. And then again, they denied me in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, saying that they would not review this matter, saying that it has already been resolved with the Superior Court. It took me to get into the stage of a PCRA. And PCRA is something that inmates have access to depending on where you're at in your appeals. And a PCRA is almost like a last chance, or a way to open up the door to argue your case. In my case, I used the PCRA as an ineffective assistance of counsel claim, saying that my attorney should have raised me being sentenced to the wrong charge, at sentencing. Like, hold up, my client is not being charged with that. He's not pleading guilty to that. You're sentencing him to the wrong charge. He failed to do so. And he also wrote me a letter and admitted, saying that I did, I failed to do it. I'll do anything I can to, help you out. If you need me to testify, I was clearly ineffective. So along with that letter, I was like, I got him. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and he's a great attorney. And he just made a mistake. But the judge made a mistake. The district attorney's office, they either didn't notice it or didn't care. He's being sentenced to a higher charge. Who cares? Or they just didn't notice it. But with this error finally in the PCRA, I had to go up against my sentencing judge. The same judge that sentenced me is the same judge the PCRA goes in front of.
Wow.
So she then had to make a ruling saying that she made an error years ago. In my case. And it's hard to get these judges down the criminal justice center to admit to making mistakes.
Right.
In her case, she wouldn't admit to it. However, we got a new district attorney at the time, Larry Krasner, And, you know, we had some new assistant district attorneys in there. I was able to speak to the ADA that was assigned to my case, let them know, like, look, clearly this was an error that was made years ago. Please, you know, can we stipulate that my PCRA should be granted? The DA was in agreement. They stipulated that it should be granted. However, I still had to, you know, fight the judge. Judge Amory B. Coyle was the judge of my matter, and even though me and the DA both agreed that I should be resentenced, she still attempted to deny my PCRA. And I actually had a 907 hearing, where then ultimately she was supposed to decide then. It's a denial hearing, and she was supposed to decide then, but that's when the ADA really stepped up and said, no, Your Honor, we have to resentence him. You know what I mean? Or this is grounds for a reversal of his case completely. And finally she did. She never admitted to making a mistake. She just said, since both parties agree, I'm going to grant the petition. And it was a lot of work in preparing a petition. I mean, if you use the wrong words or the wrong terminology, it could be denied just for that reason. If you file too late, there's a time bar in Pennsylvania. You only have a limited amount of time to file a PCRA, or else you become time barred and you're no longer eligible to file it. You're pretty much just, you know, you're stuck.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Your appeal process time has expired. So there's a lot of aspects to it, you know, but sitting there educating myself, being around the right guys, and, you know, even helping other people helped me, because you know, they would bring up issues that I didn't even think about. You know what I mean? I'm like, let me go research that. You know what I mean? And then later on, it actually helped me in my case. You know, so, you know, it was definitely a lot of work. It was hard, but you have to be persistent.
Yeah.
Persistent, absolutely.
That's incredible, man. That's incredible. How long did it take you to, like, how many years did it take of just studying and being on top of all of that to even get the resentencing hearing? Well,
it took me 5 years in appeal. 5 years in appeal, 5 years of studying, 5 years of going to the law library almost every day. A lot of the other guys in there thought I was a lifer, because they're like, this kid keeps going to the law library every day, he must have life, you know?
Yeah.
And people assumed that I was a lifer because of how frequent I visit the law library. But I got in there as much as possible. Other facilities limit you on how many times you can go, especially now with COVID. It's very restricted on how many times you can go to the law library. So I got in there as much as I could. You know, that was really my escape. You know what I mean? And so, you know, with that being said, I utilized the information that I learned to implement it in. And finally, after 5 years of appeal, my PCRA was granted, and I was resentenced. I was resentenced the first time, where the judge only reduced a couple years off my minimum. And she did that to see if I would be content and okay with that, which I wasn't. Immediately I filed a Rule 720 motion, which is a reconsideration motion, and I was resentenced again. And my sentence was then dropped down to a 7 to 20. I was about a year away at that point from my minimum.
Wow. Wow. And here you are.
Yes, yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about being released, man, in the pandemic? Like, well, first, being released. How do you feel? Like, has the world changed? Has Philly changed much? And then being released to seeing everybody wearing masks.
Yeah, they implemented the mask rules while we were in there, but being out here, it's insane to see stuff like that. And the city has definitely changed. The city had many problems before I went in, but many more problems now. The gun violence is insane, but you know, and there's definitely things that we need to start doing to make a change out here. But my personal feelings of getting out, at first it was anxiousness, it was my anxiety was through the roof, and then when I got out, I was so excited, you know, that I had this feeling of bliss, you know. But I told myself for years that the first thing I'm going to do when I get out is I'm going to go touch a tree. Now everyone was like, that's strange, why would you say that? You know, it's because all the trees are on the other side of the fence. You know what I mean? So I knew that touching that tree was like symbolic to say that, like, I'm finally free. And the crazy thing is, I was released from SCI Chester, and if you come out their main lobby door where you get released, there is a tree right in front of that door. You know what I mean? And it's sidewalk, there's cement all around it, and it's just a tree right there. You know what I mean? So it was insane. Like, and that's the first I see my dad standing there waiting to come get me and everything. And I said, first, I got to go touch this tree. You know, so, you know, It was incredible. I mean, it was definitely a culture shock. You know what I mean? And definitely, I felt as if I didn't belong in the beginning. When I came out here, I was just like, I'm not like anybody out here. You know what I mean? And it's like, and there's a feeling that was strange, that was unexpected. But I started missing the people that I just spent so many years with. You know, I mean, like, I missed them. There's even times I thought, like, man, I wish I was just in there for a little bit, just like I just bust it up with them, and you know what I mean? Like, not the whole prison experience, but just I miss them. You know what I mean? Like, these were people that I was with every single day. You know, guys that we come out on the unit together, we go to chow together, we do everything together. You know, and it's like, you know, I know their stories. I know what they've been through. I know their heartache. You know, I've had men come to me, you know, in secrecy and cry about, you know, the stuff that they're going through, you know. And one of the unwritten prison policy rules or prison politics is, like, you know, you don't cry in prison. But I've had so many guys come to me and just you know, let it go, you know, and just tell me how they're feeling. I mean, they're missing their children, you know what I mean? They're you know, they're losing their wives, they're losing their family members. I mean, COVID was killing, you know, mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and fathers. So I know a lot of guys that lost family, you know, during COVID, which is, imagine, like, you lose someone you love and you can't even go to your family and comfort them or get comfort from your family. You're just stuck in yourself thinking about, wow, I just lost my mother. How am I going to deal with this? You know, and it's like, if you aren't strongly embedded in your religion or your spirituality, you know, that can really, it can get to you. You know, it can drive you crazy. You know, those walls get smaller and smaller.
Wow, wow. Now, were you, just going back a little bit, I know we're on a release, but I wanted to hone in on that because that's hard to hear, man. You were locked up in the beginning times of COVID, like back in 2020. So, like, when COVID was new and they had the jails on complete lockdown, how was it in jail being in that room for so long and seeing all those people dying in there or getting sick?
I got into I was transferred to SCI Chester right before the pandemic. So that was in February 2020. So it was really before it really hit the prisons. They locked us down in March. They didn't know, it was new, so we understood that there was no policy or no protocol in place on how do they deal with this type of situation. So their first reaction was to lock us down. We were on 24-hour lockdown. It's not 23-in-1. There was no we could not exit ourselves. We were issued masks, which is, it's actually a piece of the sheet because they make their own sheets in there. It's a piece of a sheet with different pieces of straps on it so you can put it on your face. But I mean, we never left ourselves. So you have the bird bath, which is like you wash yourself in your sink, you know, and then they bring trays to the tray slot, and you know, that's how you eat, and then you slide your tray back out. And eventually, that was for the first few weeks. And then eventually, like, we were like, a lot of the guys were complaining about, well, we need to use the phone, we need to call our family, like, how bad is it out there? Because by looking at the news, it was like, oh my God, everyone's dying. You know what I mean? So we're like, we need to get a hold of our family. You know, and they were even afraid to send mail or bring mail in because they didn't know if the mail can be contaminated from the outside. So everything was halted, and we lost communication with our families and our loved ones. And that was a difficult period because it was like, you know, I know with my personal situation, my dad is very sick, you know, so I was like, oh my God, if my dad gets it, he might be one of these fatalities, you know what I mean? I just wanted to call them to see if they were all right, but then also comfort them by letting them know that I'm all right, you know what I mean?
Right,
you know?
right.
So, but eventually they gave us that opportunity when they would attach a phone to a wheelie and they would wheel it from cell to cell. You know, they would pull it out the cell, and they would soak it down, and then they would take it to the next cell. We still weren't able to leave. Eventually, it started becoming more lax, but when it did, I don't believe the right protocols were in place at that time because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, COVID was flourished in there, you know, and we lost a lot of guys. There's a lot of our older guys. A lot of them were lifers as well because, you know, our biggest population in there of the elderly in there are lifers. So we start losing them left and right. I mean, they started putting stuff on the news channel that we can watch, and like the prison news. and it would show like another memorial scene for, you know, an inmate that passed away on another unit, or even your own unit. And it was heartbreaking, because it's like, you know, they couldn't even send their bodies home. You know what I mean? They were COVID contaminated, so they couldn't even release the bodies to the families. You know, so I mean, Sheesh. And then we were all afraid. We were like, you know, we were afraid because we know, like, we're not bringing it in. It's got to be the officers, the staff, and stuff like that. So we became afraid of the staff. We didn't want them to come around us. You know, we didn't know how bad this was.
Right.
But then they became afraid of us as well. Once they started seeing that inmates started becoming sick, they were afraid of us. So they mandated that we wear masks, we got to keep a certain distance away from them. But they became very aggressive about it, because obviously they were afraid. You know what I mean? And they didn't want to take it back home to their families.
Right.
You know, so it actually stirred up like a lot of, I would have to say like a lot of negative energy between staff and the inmates, on the fear of COVID. You know.
Sheesh. Wow. Yo, man. Yeah. COVID really, I mean, it really did something to this entire world. It shook the world. And I'm just happy, man. We got our vaccines, and you know, we're getting back to normality. It may not ever be normal, but it's going to be as close to it as possible. Well, listen, Joshua, I just really humbly, man, want to thank you for this interview, man. This was incredible. I could talk to you forever. But before we get out of here, is there anything you want to leave the people with? Any words of encouragement or anything?
Yeah, before anything, this entire time I mentioned that I did this, I did that. At first, I have to give my praise to God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because for Him and all the blessings that He put in my life is the reason why I am at where I'm at today. You know, it wasn't my own power, but was His will. Along with that is that there's guys in prison right now that are sentenced to life without parole. And some of them been down 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. They really are sentenced to death by incarceration. And a lot of them, I believe, can be great mentors out here in society. They have so much to offer. A lot of them deserve a second chance. A lot of people think that the victims and the victims' families, they want to see these guys in prison for the rest of their life. But after talking to a lot of them, which I've been doing lately, they don't. You know, when they find out about what this guy's been doing in prison and all the changes he made and all the good things, and really seen him change himself around, they're like, yeah, well, why won't they give him a second chance of coming out? And that's a popular question by, you know, the family of victims. Like, I think he's ready to come out. And we've had some family members of victims actually write letters to the Board of Pardons to try to assist them with getting out. Wow. You know what I mean? So it's like, not everyone wants to see, you know, the person that maybe harmed or took the life of their loved one spend the rest of their life in prison, especially when they made changes. And they can come out, like, you may have harmed or took lives when, you know, younger in your life, but now, like, you have the ability, you have the voice where you can now save lives. You know, especially with the violence in these streets. You know, and they have the wisdom, they have the experience, they have the personal knowledge of what it feels like to be incarcerated. None of them think it's cool. It's not cool. You don't get respect because you were in prison. Right. None of them think that way. But young guys nowadays, they think that. They think, oh yeah, I'm gonna go in there and be respected because I'm a killer. No, they're all so upset and remorseful for what they did. A lot of them want to take it back. They don't want the title of being gangster, or, you know, being a murderer. It's not cool to them. You know, they would rather be a respected member of the community than to be labeled that way. And that's the message. They have stories that they want to get out. You know, we have to find ways to let their voices be heard, and I'm one of their channels. You know, so I like that. Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. So.
Well, yo, man, appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely.
With time we can, another episode in the books. We out. Peace.